Dan has worked with hundreds of sales organizations from Portland, Maine to Perth, Australia, ranging from top Fortune 500 companies like Bank of America, Bank of America's U.S. Trust, ultra high net worth team, ExxonMobil, as well as groups like Keller Williams Commercial, Edward Jones, and the one I was most interested in, the U.S. Navy SEALs, which you're going to share some stories with us from that. As an experienced outside sales management, and market management professional, an international consultant and trainer, Dan brings both real-world experience and practical tools and techniques to create large amounts of growth and change to teams and sales professionals in a short amount of time. So we've got a quarter that we want you to change for us right now. Please join me in welcoming Dan.
Well, good morning. How are y'all doing?
Very good.
Great. Looking forward to some golf. Should be warmed up by now. I want to start things off. Like John, that was a great talk. Some interesting information. I was doing some research before coming out here and flipping through some Wall Street Journal articles. And how many of you would agree that commercial real estate, well, rather scratch that, residential real estate's had kind of a rough go of it for the last couple of years? Is that fair to say? There was one article that said that the commercial real estate is going to make that one pale in comparison over the next 3 years. So 2 years to come to balance. Suffice to say, you guys have a tough row to hoe, as they say. Am I right? No? You all think it's going to be smooth sailing, easy pickings? Low-hanging fruit, lots of stuff to... Okay. Well, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the experiences I've had in working with teams like the Navy SEALs, but more specifically, those guys, as one staff sergeant said, they now have to deal with a lot of government bureaucrats, diplomats, and other pukes. They're more accustomed to hitting people with the back end of their rifle and getting things done, but more and more as they're doing what they do, they need to use sales techniques and they need to negotiate far more than they ever have. And it was a real honor to work with them, a great group of men. But today I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've seen when working with sales teams that really, number one, holds them back. I know that there's a lot of folks in the room who are very successful. I know that there's more people in the room who'd like to be even more successful than they currently are. Even the most successful in the room would like to be more successful, right? Who would like to make more money next year? Great, almost everybody had their hand up. Tough crowd. Now how about this? Who's not going to raise your hand no matter what I ask? So what I like to say is, when I go in and work with teams for training, I come right out in front and say, training does not work. How many of you have been to training before? How many of you just love going to training? Training doesn't work. Who's ever experienced this? They've like gone in their backyard and the bulkhead needs to be painted over because there's some rust spots blooming through. You know what I'm talking about? How many people have painted over rust? How successful is that? It's not very successful at all. And that is ultimately what most training ends up being. People walking in, looking at a new technique, a new tool, a new trick, and maybe for a few weeks, maybe for a couple months, they'll take something on and they'll do it. But then what usually happens? Yeah, just go back to your old habits. Go back to your old beliefs. When I work with teams, the greatest amount of change that happens is when people start to look at their old behaviors. The things that have worked, but maybe they're not working so well anymore. And a lot of folks are open and acknowledging that the way business is transacting nowadays, it's shifting more. You've got to get out, you've got to meet more people, you've got to build more relationships. Some of the old connections aren't as tried and true as they used to be. So it's about getting out and creating new relationships and starting things from scratch in some ways, looking at what other people in the room are doing. My gosh, you've got a lot of folks here who are very successful. Something's going to work for you that others not so much. So the idea here today is to look at what it is that holds people back so that you can start to look at things differently. And to do that, I have got my personal favorite little story. How many of you have ever been to the American Southwest? Yeah, you know, Phoenix, that area? Well, there's a humble little insect out there. I'm not going to say, well, yeah, you can Google it because you said everybody had to turn their phones off. I actually said that once and someone pulled up their phone and pulled up the Google. Google American Southwest sand wasp, and you'll see all the scientific study that's been done on this little critter, the sand wasp. So that's what I want to tell you about today. I hope you won't find any out there, you probably shouldn't. But again, this is the desert. So, we're in the American Southwest. What's that? Right, specifically what kind of cactus? Perfect, you got it. I'm not that good at drawing, but you all been there. So you got the American Southwestern sand wasp. Now he lives in the desert. What kind of a home do you think the sand wasp, what kind of box, right? What kind of box, what kind of home do you think the sand wasp is going to live in? In the sand, right? It's the sand. Come on, it's not that hard. You're not even wearing a mic. So he lives in a little burrow. Now, like I said, scientists have been studying this critter for years, and there's a ton of research on this. So, what we need is our scientist. That's a scientist. He's hiding behind the cactus, for those of you in the back who can't see. So this is what happens. The sand wasp will go out and forage for food. So being a sand wasp, do you think he finds his food and carries it back in his sand wasp hands? The answer here is no. Does he find and carry it back in his hands? No. No. Why? Because he's a sand wasp. He doesn't have hands. He's got wings and he's got a stinger and he's got a mouth. So where do you think the sand wasp is going to carry his food? In his mouth, exactly. Now this is the curious, very curious piece about the sand wasp. Each and every time the sand wasp finds his food, he does not stop and eat it as a picnic. He finds the food, puts it in his mouth, thank you, brings it back to his burrow. This is where it gets a little funky. The sand wasp will deposit the food item outside of the burrow. Then and only then, he'll go into his burrow. Scientists aren't quite sure why. They think maybe he's looking for Goldilocks. You know, checking out the different little... For whatever reason, the sand wasp will check to see if there's any predators, any prey, any competitors, whatever. And once he goes in to see that his burrow is safe, he'll come back out and grab the food item in what? His mouth. Go back inside and eat it. Are you following me? It's not that complicated, but it's what he does. So what do you think the scientist does? Masochistic little sadistic scientist. The sand wasp deposits the food item. The scientist comes out, takes the food, and moves it. So what do you think the sand wasp does? Get the food. Food's over here. Sand wasp gets out of his burrow, looks, no food. So he goes to find the food, gets the food, puts it in his mouth, brings it back to the burrow, puts it on the edge of the burrow, goes into his little hole. Poor sucker. What do you think the scientist does? He moves the food! Again! Sand wasp comes out, what does the sand wasp do? Goes and gets the food, puts food in his mouth, brings it back to the edge, puts it on the edge, climbs in to see if there's Goldilocks or whatever's in there. What does the scientist do? He moves the food. How long does this go on for? No! It doesn't go on forever! It can't, it won't. The poor sand wasp, it will end. When do you think it will end? When the sand wasp dies. Yes. 9 times out of 10, the sand wasp dies. What do you think he dies of? Starvation. He dies of starvation. Where's the food item? In his mouth! The sand wasp dies of starvation with food in its mouth. This is a set of behaviors the sand wasp has mastered over generations. It has led to every ounce of evolutionary success he's ever seen. And as soon as circumstances change, past behavior, which has led to past success, kills him. So what's the key takeaway of the story? You've got to change your behavior when circumstances change. Absolutely. If you find yourself continuing to do the same thing over and over again, hoping to get the result you want but have never been able to find, you've got to change your behavior. You're going to try something different. We talked about working hard, working smart. Maybe for you, you've always worked smart, and all of a sudden things are drying up. Well, pull on your big boy pants and go try working harder for a little bit. Or if you've always been the guy who gets up at 6:30 and works from 7 to 7, and something's not working, go ask somebody who's found the Working Smart program to be successful. Try something different. There's more than enough wisdom and knowledge in this room to be able to go out and prospect like you've never prospected before. To build new business like you've never built before.